You know how World War I usually gets summed up by that one gunshot in Sarajevo? Yeah, Archduke Franz Ferdinand gets shot, alliances react, and suddenly millions are dying in muddy trenches. But what if I told you the real trigger wasn't the bullet, it was money? A few powerful bankers, meeting in smoke-filled rooms from London to New York, made massive loans worth billions in today's money. Those loans turned a small Balkan fight into the bloodiest disaster the world had ever seen. And here's the twist, they funded both sides. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll see why your history books skip this part and how it still connects to the debts behind modern wars. Let's rewind to 1914. Europe's a powder keg. Nationalism is boiling. Armies are showing off. And yes, the assassination lights the fuse. But if you look past the propaganda posters, you'll find something darker. A financial arms race that had been building for decades. Empires were drowning in debt from grabbing colonies. The gold standard was cracking under industrial greed, and secret treaties were less about borders and more about money. Picture this: Britain and France, the old powers, sitting on huge colonial empires in Africa and Asia, pulling in resources like rubber and oil to feed their factories, but buried in debt from endless expansion. Germany, the new industrial giant, arrived late to the colonial scramble, desperate for its own share of land and materials in Morocco and the Middle East. Russia and Austria-Hungary were old, shaky empires borrowing just to stay together. And behind them all, not kings or emperors, but the merchant banks of London, Rothschilds, Barings, Morgans, lending money at interest rates that would make loan sharks blush. By 1914, the global economy was tied together by the gold standard. Every country's currency was backed by gold, so one small disruption in trade could send gold and stability bleeding away. Imperial rivalries weren't just about pride. They were about survival. When Britain blocked German ships in the North Sea, it wasn't just a naval move. It was a financial chokehold, cutting off exports and threatening German banks. Here's the wild part. These financial battles didn't just lead to war, they funded it. JP Morgan gave the Allies a $500 million lifeline, which pushed the US away from neutrality. Germany scrambled to grab gold from its allies just to keep its economy running. But did these bankers know what they were starting, or was it just business as usual? Stay tuned. The paper trail is unbelievable. Now for the big reveal. One loan buried deep in the records changed everything. To understand it, we have to go back to the root. Imperialism wasn't about honor or glory. It was about money, plain and simple. By the late 1800s, Europe's powers had carved up Africa like a holiday feast. Britain grabbed Egypt and South Africa for cotton and gold. France pushed into China for rubber. Germany jumped in late, taking Tanganyika and Namibia for minerals. Why? Because their factories were working non-stop, producing steel, rails, and weapons, and they needed cheap resources to keep profits high. But here's the catch. Building empires was expensive. Railroads through jungles, forts in deserts, wars against people who didn't want to be ruled. It all cost a fortune. Governments borrowed huge sums from private banks to pay for it. Britain, the empire where the sun never set, owed billions by 1900, much of it to London's financial elite. The Rothschilds with connections across Europe, Barings recovering from their Argentina crisis, and JP Morgan in the US, watching closely. These weren't public loans. They were private deals backed by future colonial taxes. France was no better off. Their push into North Africa left French banks sweating over unstable debts that basically turned colonies into ATMs for lenders. Germany was hit hardest. United only in 1871, it was still trying to catch up. Its navy's spending soared to compete with Britain's, while colonies like Togo barely paid for themselves. By 1913, Germany's foreign debt hit 20 billion marks, much of it funneled through the Reichsbank and private financiers like Deutsche Bank. Russia wasn't far behind. Tsar Nicholas borrowed billions from French banks to prepare for war with the Ottomans, debts that made St. Petersburg dependent on Paris. It sounds like a giant game of Monopoly gone wrong. And it was. This mountain of debt made the world economy fragile. Tariffs rose, trade wars broke out, and Britain's splendid isolation meant cutting off German exports, draining Berlin's gold reserves. One bad harvest in India or a revolt in Africa could send the whole system crashing. These tensions fed paranoia. Kaiser Wilhelm II wasn't just afraid of being surrounded. He feared bankruptcy if Britain blocked his trade routes. And the bankers? They thrived on the chaos. More fear meant more loans and higher profits. By 1914, Europe's economy was a house of cards, and every ruler owed money to the same lenders. So how did all this turn into a world war? Enter the gold standard, the invisible handcuffs that made every rivalry a fight for survival. Okay, deep breath. Let's talk about the gold standard. Sounds dry, like something from an economics class, right? But this was the system that locked Europe into war. Since the 1870s, every major power tied its money to gold. 1 pound, 1 mark, 1 franc, each worth a fixed amount of gold. It kept trade smooth and prices steady, until it didn't. Gold is limited, so when war, famine, or strikes slowed mining or trade, gold drained from countries. Currencies crashed, and panic spread. In 1914, Britain held about 40% of the world's gold, thanks to its colonies in South Africa and Australia. Germany, on the other hand, was running low after spending heavily on its navy. When crises hit, like the 1911 showdown between France and Germany over Morocco, gold fled the markets. Banks raised interest rates to pull it back, choking credit for regular people. Imagine a baker in Berlin unable to get a loan because the Kaiser spent too much on warships. This wasn't just about numbers. It hit people's stomachs. Jobs vanished. Bread riots broke out. The solution? Grab more colonies for more gold mines. But colonies were a zero-sum game. If France took Morocco, Germany lost, and France had to borrow even more money from the Rothschilds to arm up. And those alliances you've read about? They weren't simple handshakes. They were secret deals wrapped in fine print and loans. Like Bismarck's hidden 1887 reinsurance treaty, where Germany promised Russia neutrality unless France attacked, kept secret so Austria wouldn't freak out. Or the 1915 Treaty of London, where Britain, France, and Russia bribed Italy to join them by offering land from Austria and Albania, plus a $50 million loan and a cut of future spoils. Then there was the Sykes-Picot Agreement, secretly carving up Ottoman lands for oil even before the war was won. This wasn't diplomacy, it was investment strategy. Banks underwrote the carnage. Germany, locked out of many foreign markets, turned inward. By 1918, it held 71% of Austria-Hungary's debt and had stripped Vienna's gold vaults dry. Berlin financed its allies' war while using that same gold to plug its own leaks. It was parasitic finance. And while millions of soldiers marched off to die, it was gold clerks and bankers in Frankfurt and London who were really calling the shots. If that stirs some anger, good, because here's where it gets even darker. One American banker made a move so huge it not only financed the war, but also forced the U.S. to pick a side. Ready? Meet J.P. Morgan Jr., the Wall Street titan who turned neutrality into a joke. When war started in 1914, the U.S. was supposed to stay out. President Wilson preached peace, and most Americans didn't care much either way. But Morgan saw opportunity. His bank became the Allies' private supplier, handling $3 billion worth of munitions, food, and steel. That's over $80 billion today. Then, in 1915, came a single $500 million loan to Britain and France, the largest foreign bond issue ever at that time. The Rothschilds in London helped move funds to keep France solvent. Why take such a risk? Because if Germany won, the Allies would default, and Morgan's firm would lose everything. By 1916, Britain was paying everyone's bills. Italy's, France's, Russia's. Their gold reserves were nearly gone. Private credit maxed out. That's when Morgan started pushing Washington. He and his partners whispered in Wilson's ear that if the Allies collapsed, U.S. exports would tank. Later investigations showed these loans tied America's hands. If Britain or France defaulted, Morgan's empire would crash. So when the U.S. entered the war in 1917, it wasn't just for democracy. It was also to save Wall Street's balance sheet. Germany tried to fight back by cutting secret gold deals with the Ottomans and giving Austria billions in credit, but it only made things worse. Inflation exploded, and by the end of the war, currencies were collapsing everywhere. Central banks suspended gold payments and started printing paper money instead. The war cost about $28 billion. Taxes covered little of it. Governments sold bonds to citizens, patriotic loans that even children bought. Meanwhile, banking houses like Morgan and Rothschild took their cut in commissions as trenches filled with the poor. It's heartbreaking. Letters from the front talked about mud, fear, and lost friends. But back home, boardrooms toasted victory loans. 16 million dead, empires gone, yet the financial web survived. The US came out on top as the new global lender. Britain lost its crown, but the same bankers stayed rich. This wasn't bad luck, it was design. When the guns fell silent in 1918, the world's debts didn't disappear. They exploded. The Treaty of Versailles wasn't peace, it was a new trap. Reparations chained Germany to debt and hyperinflation, paving the way for Hitler. We talk about the bullet in Sarajevo as the start of World War I, but the real war was fought in the vaults, where gold mattered more than human lives and loans lasted longer than nations. We've glorified the trenches, but the true horror was financial. Ordinary people, your great-grandparents, suffered and died while bankers built the system we still live under. The war to end all wars didn't end war. It created modern finance. The Rothschilds and Morgans didn't fire bullets, but their pens redrew the map in blood. And today, their echoes are still with us, in every sanction, every bailout, every global crisis. If this story made you see history differently, think about what wars today are really fought over. The weapons may change, but the money never does.